Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us for episode 3 of the Boys of EdTech. Today we are so pumped to have the doctors of EdTech with us, the gals of EdTech, the ladies of EdTech. So we're super thrilled for Brittany and Barbara to join us. We got our expert Rick in the house, our superintendent in resident. We got our Ryan, our exited founder, EdTech guru, and Jacob, myself, on the dodo. But before we kind of jump into all the things, we wanted to turn it over to Dr. Mullen and Dr. Miller to do proper intros because I could never do justice by your guys' background. But I'll kick it over to Dr. Mullen first.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. I'm Barbara, and we always start with the doctor, and then we bring it down the formality some. So I'm Barbara, and I am the proud superintendent of Rush-Henrietta Central School District, right outside of Rochester, New York. And we are a clock it. We are I call it a unicorn district. We're rural because we have a right to farm community. We're urban because we're right outside Rochester City and have some beautiful students that bus into us every year. And then we're purely suburban, first ring suburb since beginning of the suburbs. And beautifully diverse and really on the edge of a lot of innovation. I have an amazing team that loves to do almost anything I bring back from insert conference here. They're like, yeah, okay, let's try. And then I also on the personal side have a teenager and a preteen boy. And so just, send me thoughts and prayers, tots and prayers because they are fun and they go to my schools. And so I really love being a super mom and navigating having my kids in the district I serve. But it just adds an added layer of urgency, of care, of amazingness because these are my babies. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I can take it from there. Brittany Miller. I lead the Center for Outcomes-Based Contracting, and previously, actually, was a district leader in Denver Public Schools. I spent the first portion of my career there, and definitely came from the academic side of the house and from the school side of the house. So, started as a teacher, did a lot of work in helping schools across our district with understanding their school accountability framework and like how to track data effectively in order to move the needle for kids. And then toward the end of my tenure in Denver Public Schools, I was the chief of staff for academics when COVID hit. And my superintendent and deputy super came to me and said, great, so we're going to need to put together a plan. We're going to be closing schools for 3 weeks. And I need you to get a team of folks from across academics together, one person from each department, and put together a remote learning plan for the district. And I said, okay, I'm on top of it. I just have one question. What is remote learning? And so at that moment, we had to kind of pivot, figure out how we were going to put 90,000 students online for what we thought was going to be, a couple of weeks. And of course, ended up being much longer. And so that really launched my journey into understanding a lot more about the ed tech space from what I had done previously. When I was in the classroom, I had a projector that I borrowed from, I think, like the art teacher, maybe, and a couple of laptops that I had, like, scavenged from, I don't know, old computers that folks had given me in order to have a little bit of tech in the classroom. So definitely have learned a lot about ed tech since then. And ultimately, when I left the district, I had launched our work for outcomes based contracting and got not only a lot of information about how you do ed tech effectively, but also how you engage providers effectively and how you really think through like what does it look like to work alongside a provider in a true partnership and not just a transactional relationship. And so, though I come from an instructional background, and that's really where my heart is, I spent a lot of time in the more recent years focused on the business side of, how districts buy different products and services, and then how they can really partner with providers to continue to drive toward what we know is most important on the academic side, which is, of course, student learning and student outcomes.
Yeah, wow. So many questions for Barbara and Brittany. Kids in your district. We will come back to that one. I have lots of questions. Having two little ones in LAUSD, but not working at LAUSD, it's a new one for me. And then Brittany, with so many questions on all things COVID as well, because I feel like I feel like we all need to write a book, and everyone has like 3 pages around like what the craziest first month was for everybody. Because I feel like everybody's stories are so unique and like hearing this takes me back to that crazy time of having I think an 18-month-old at that point in daycare. But yeah, ooh, I got some shivers there. But Ryan, I'm gonna turn it over to you for the first question.
Yeah, so I had so just for our audience, for both Brittany and Barbara, I think, one, think about, EdTech companies, Brittany, all the organizations that you work with and the districts that you work with, Barbara leading districts like Providence, Cambridge, now Rush-Henrietta, which is a unicorn. Um, Hearing from the leaders doing the work on the front lines, relative to strategic priorities and what matters most. And this one's going to be to Barbara for your district. I think is one of the most valuable things we could talk about in this podcast, because I think you and I talk about big rocks. You always give me props. I say big rocks. I'm pretty sure it's your term. I'm going to give you the flowers for that. But will you share with us, for you leading Rush-Henrietta, maybe give us your big three? Like, what are your big three district priorities? Give it to us for 26, 27, but if there's any context around it as to why those are true, we would love to hear about that. I think that would stimulate a cool conversation today.
Oh, yeah. So, hot off the presses, I think you're the first person to have me articulate them out loud. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if any of the staff are going to like tune into the podcast. They'll be like, well, she didn't tell us that. But it actually is not, they're not nebulous goals. They're not nebulous priorities. We have a strategic plan vision 2037 that the community built and adopted, led out of the mouths of babes, that we built in 2024. I mean, yeah, 2024. And so it is a continuation upon that, of things, of dreams that people named. And the funny part about it is that I think people just kind of said stuff. You bring people together. There's a whole bunch of sticky notes flying everywhere. Get some Paneras, some Dunkin' Donuts, and then you just hope magic happens. You have a cute little document, and then 2 years later, poof, right? Collective amnesia, and you're like making up stuff as you go. The beautiful, did I
I
name it
mean,
or did
no,
I name
I think that's facts. Okay, keep
Pumpkin
going.
pieces especially, right? But the really great thing about this strategic plan, and I think I've shared with you, Ryan, and Jacob, like when I would go to ASU GSB, I would put it on a little card. Partners would scan the QR code, and then I would say, "Now you tell me where you fit in this, and tell us how to move this vision forward and how you see yourself in this collective work." And so, fast forward 3 years later, at this point, we're building upon that. And one thing that I can tell you is an absolute priority, which sounds a little um mundane, not as sexy as like the all stuff, is facilities. It is bringing our facilities into whatever century we're in, right? Into the new space-time continuum. Like, I don't know what century this is, 21st, 22nd. But we're here. And so a lot of the innovative work that folks are really eager to do and take on have to be layered on top of an infrastructure that is like not aged out, that's not an end of life, that you can't bring in $10 million worth of technology upgrades and then have the roof, like the water collapse on it, right? So you have to really think about that. And so for us, that is really powerful. And then as we're doing a combination of like end of life upgrades, just evergreen stuff that we have to do, we're thinking about things like how we can make our facilities a little bit, not a little bit more, but like how we can really have I'm stuck like climate ready facilities that we can shift. It's real. I'm not a ooh person. Our climate is going to look very different here in Rochester than it does the DMV, than it does the Delta and Mississippi. And so we have had hot days where kids have not even been able to come because we haven't had climate control classrooms. So that's really important for us, and bringing our partners along to say, what is the newest, greatest technology you have and how can we retrofit it into the buildings? And then, of course, student wellness, which is a part of our environment that we create, and then also student achievement, particularly in math outcomes at the secondary level, and written expression and that cognitive resiliency at the secondary level. So those are like our really, really big rocks. And it's going to take a generation to do some of these things. But if I walk out the door and every building is climate control, then I'll be happy.
I mean, look, that's like a needs pyramid, right? Dr. Mullen, like think about it, like at the foundation needs pyramid, that's real for students to be able to have a safe, comfortable place to learn. It sounds, to your point, it sounds simple, but you're there every day in the schools. Like, that's
Yeah. And
real.
I mean, it's just like, basic, right? Like you just know that when you have the opportunity to rip out a wall, you're going to say, okay, what can we put inside the wall to make all of this great technology more accessible? We don't want to wheel a cart, wheel a touchboard, a touch screen in. We want to mount it, right? So it's hand in hand, the infrastructure and innovation that we're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for articulating that. I'm going to toss it back to Jacob in a minute, but I heard, academic achievement in math in there. And so Jacob, I think you have probably a pretty pointed question for Dr. Miller. I'll call you Brittany if that's okay with you.
Yes, please.
But I think that gets the ball rolling, Barbara. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll give you an A. I'll give you an A. Well, you're gonna get to an A plus. That was the first time, right?
And big question for Brittany, but I'd like to double click into one thing that Barbara said. Don't mind me. We all are friends with Michael Connor. He has this thing of like, hey, where he spotlights it for the audience. He's like, some of you are listening while you're walking or driving. Like, go back and re-listen to this. Your card that you share at conferences that has your strategic plan is literally what we've been talking about for 2 past episodes of like, if somebody gets to you and has 30 minutes of your time for them to be prepared on what your strategic plan is, and like you're almost doing the work for them in advance. You're like, here's what it is. Help me help yourself. Help yourself, help me. Like, where do you fit in on this strategic plan? So like, I mean, double click on that for anyone listening. That was a big one. And for, any superintendent that's listening, whoa, like imagine being able to show a vendor quickly, like, here's my plans. Like, do you fit in on any of this? And if not, we could still be friends, but like we don't have a mutual shared goal based on your product on what we're trying to solve for right this second. So love that. So kudos. Brittany, one question, I know you and I talk quite a bit. We have a lot of mutual friends on all things outcomes-based contracting. I feel like every time I post anything on LinkedIn, it always gets like 20,000 views when it comes to outcomes-based contracting. But you sit in kind of a unique space, right? Where you kind of have a dual-sided, it's not a marketplace, but like a dual-sided lens, right? Because you serve districts that are thinking about this and thinking about setting up contracts, but you're also serving edtech solution providers that are now thinking about this as, hey, if districts are doing this, we need to also align and get our ducks in a row. So I wonder, like, can you give us some intel on how you support both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what Barbara was sharing around that QR code is so central to it. And I would actually like, I've never thought about it this way, but when you were saying like you serve, I was like, I think actually what we do is focus all of our energy on serving the same client, if you will, which is students. Right, and that has to be where we start the conversation, not like what the end kind of after you get through your logic model goal is, but really like how are we starting with that as the core value proposition? And so, taking that QR code a little bit further, like my dream would be if every superintendent and district leader that was walking through those halls and every provider that was also walking through those halls had a clear sense of not only the strategic plan of the district, but specifically, what are the clear outcomes that that district cares about for students? And what is the exact way that the district measures those outcomes? So in our model, we refer to that as clearly defined outcomes and metric pairs. And what that really means is that not only are we saying, like, we want students to be more cognitively advanced in high school and ready for career in college, but actually, like, the way we measure that is by how they do on, the New York State exam or on their SAT because we have universal access in our district, whatever that looks like, so that they can really articulate, like, students that are performing here at the start should be performing here by the end of this engagement with, this provider in order to really meet our shared goals. Now, is that going to be a causal impact analysis just by saying, hey, we want this thing to happen and providers can come along? No, but it does do a lot of really nice things to keep everybody coherent and organized so we all really can serve the same group of people, which is, of course, our students. And so the way that we support that at the center is through a couple of different means. One is technical assistance, where we support both districts and providers with understanding what we've learned from the providers and districts that we work with to date. And then we also help them with the implementation of that work, right? So we start by asking the district, like, okay, what are the key decision points that we need to make when it comes to who you care about serving for this particular engagement? What are the outcomes and metrics? And then help them set up the pricing for that with mutual accountability and continuous improvement language built into the contract. Now, you can work directly with us. All those resources are also available open source on our website, so they're free to download for all of our high impact tutoring and ed tech work. And we also have our standards of excellence, which articulate like what does that actually look like in practice, and what have those that have done this work already learned as they've been engaging in the work, right? On the provider side, we have learned really quickly from our districts that it's actually really challenging for them to work with every provider individually on this model. Be like, let me train you again on how you do an OBC, right, in our system. And so we have a provider learning series as well, where providers can come and learn alongside us about how they can really structure their contracts in an outcomes-based contracting format. Because a lot of providers are now seeing this as a huge, market opportunity to really like have that competitive edge in, what is a crowded and shrinking marketplace. So those are kind of the main ways that we serve districts and providers. And then we also have a lot of research that's always ongoing that's also available on our website so that we can continue to spread back what we're learning in the field. We just had a report drop from Digital Promise that articulated what it was that they learned in the first EdTech cohort implementation, where we achieved 14 times what a typical EdTech implementation would look like for student dosage across the country. There's over 10,000 students in many major districts across the country, blue and red states, so it does cross the political aisle as well, which is always important for a superintendent to keep in mind, given the politics of education at this moment in time. And so what they found from that is that it really enabled both the provider and the district to focus more intentionally on implementation and understand how to build greater coherence with the ed tech they were bringing into the classroom, with the core instruction, with the tier 3 interventions, et cetera, so that they were able to really go all the way from the district contract down into the classroom, with students actually being able to articulate why they were using the intervention, what the expectation was, and then the teachers were able to see that that outcome was what the provider was also held accountable to. So it just brought everything together in a really nice way to, again, serve our primary client, which is, of course, students.
Yeah, I love kind of both sides of alignment to, get on the same page for student outcomes, right? And, one shout to you guys and shout to a provider, but also a district that I saw this firsthand in Linwood Unified over the summer. They worked with Galileo Learning and they did an outcomes-based contract for the summer, right? And it was like part of it was, to activate, of course, and then part of it was because they were using some state funding that tied into attendance. Some of it was attendance based payout. Some of it was parent satisfaction. Like, were you happy as a parent over the summer with what was provided? And then some of it was, are the students engaged? Are the students having a good time? So it was it was the first time I actually saw it firsthand. But what I realized in talking to both sides, both Galileo and the superintendent at Linwood, is you really had the clear data of how did this work this summer? Do we need to make this larger across all of the schools we serve? Do we need to pull it back? And what they saw, like, overwhelmingly was like, it was so popular. I think the next year that they did it, like, it 3x in size. So like, how neat is that of a story to tell as a vendor to say, hey, let me just give you an example of how this worked in a different district. And so you can actually like go ask them yourself. Like, that's very, very powerful for me as like, 16-year sales guy to be like, hey, don't listen to me. Let's talk to somebody who's already doing it. And it's really powerful. But so that's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Rick, I'm going to throw it over to you. I think you have our next question.
Yeah, I do want to send a shout out to Texas. We think we invented everything. So our my buddies in Ector County that really kind of took the bull by the horns, if you will. So Keely Simpson and Scott Murray that really kind of led the way here in Texas, and now Texas having so many financial constraints, like booming economy, public schools are broke. So something that everything has to be reconsidered in this moment. So. Brittany, shout out to you and your team working with Ector County and making that happen to give us another option here. And then Dr. Mullen, I have a QR code, but I don't bring my strategic plan. I have like mugshots of all of my board members and just ask people like, who can anybody here get these people to act right? And if you can't, if you can, then we can do business. So that I had to switch it up there, after dealing with school boards. But I'll pose the question to you, Dr.
I'm
Mullen, because
like
I don't
that
know.
lady that's like with her friends who have boyfriends that's acting up, and you be like, "Girl, I don't know what you're talking about. My man is good. My board is good. I don't even know what you're talking
Well,
about." Amen, man.
well,
I love it.
bless you. Stay there as long as you
Girl,
can,
hey, I can't.
because I don't know. It seems like the ones I know, man, it's like what are we just picking? We just drawn randomly out of the crowd. What are we doing here? But anyway, with some of the strategic priorities you spoke about, here in Texas, like it is very difficult where we sit now with our lack of resources and also our human capital to be able to manage things by ourselves. I mean, the need for trusted providers is exponentially going up, even though money's going backwards. So for your strategic priorities, do you envision having to use partners? Obviously, with the facilities, I would assume that would be a yes. But some of the other ones, what's your take on that? Do you need partners to help get that work done?
So yes, and I know there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but like the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. But I'd like to reiterate, reshape it, and in this conversation, say that the future belongs to those who can clearly see today. And so I say that to say that the most robust partnerships are going to be those partners and providers that can help with progress monitoring, whether that is by way of project implementation, project adoption, workflow management, whether it's human or agentic, who can provide insights, human or agentic, and then human, and really help districts do something that I think is long, like very long needed, which is really increase their data maturity models. Like, how do you evolve with being able to have the right data at the right time at the right altitude to make the decisions that have the most impact for the future? And in my mind, that has a lot to do with democratizing the way we talk about data, who's at the table, who's able to have like step into the conversation, our students, to having agency on the numbers that define their experience, our parents and families at the table. How are you developing your teachers to have that data, insight, integrity, intuition, right? All numbers don't mean the same things. And so, really, the game, as you speak of it right now, is like more insights, more, judicious spending, more tight alignment in the ways that we're doing, quicker iteration, failing faster, and not fast like break things like for the sake of kind of tech bro-y kind of way of like, come in, shake it up, do it, get money quick. But like really, because we also have a sense of urgency where we only have kids for a finite amount of time,
Yeah.
and then unfortunately, they got the rest of their life to kind of bumble through it. I'm like 13 forever in my mind. And so just like, I can't believe I'm the adult in the room. But the schools released me at a certain age. And then I had to kind of figure it out and build this life afterwards. And so it really isn't like being clear about the strategic priorities isn't for some of the reasons in corporate that we might think, even though we adopt many of the language and structures and organizational practices that corporate does. It really is because the widgets we produce, we have a short amount of time to actually produce the best humans we can in that amount of time. And so for us, I do work with partners. I work with ILO Group. They helped us with our strategic plan. Help us with progress monitoring. But I have seen some really great ways that, folks have developed agents and thought about bringing them into our systems and leveraging them as superintendents, as cabinet teams, to be able to lift things in a way that it's not that we don't have time. I mean, it's just not the best use of our time, right? Like, if I got to be in a classroom or sitting looking at 30 different spreadsheets to synthesize and organize all this information to present to the board, but an agent can kind of point me in the right direction and do this workflow that is meaningful and ends in a nice, tidy report, that then we can spend time as a community unpacking the insights, making meaning, saying who else needs to be at this table. Now, how do we galvanize or change this message for which audience? That's the best use of an agent and, in my time, right? So I would say, there are a lot of really cool partners across the continuum that can help. It's not, sorry to the people whose like bread and butter is doing all the spreadsheets and like getting all the sticky notes and putting people together and all the post-it stuff. But that we're coming out of the age of like a full day training where you put a strategic plan together and you do all of that. It really is about bringing people into a room and producing something together that you could never produce apart. And to the extent that partners help us get closer to those experiences, the more I think the more relevant and useful their help will be in running the districts and moving towards the goals.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the focus on, this student has 1 year in second grade and we've got to maximize the most of that. But now the other end of the spectrum where their career opportunities are changing so rapidly, like we've got to be able to adapt within that 1 year, because we may not have the programming that we need because the market's telling us these are the opportunities that will be needed in 6 months, in 18 months. So a lot of variables to consider. Ryan, let me kick it over to you.
Yeah. So this part, we love for Barbara and Brittany, like, what this is the theme. What makes a great partner? The first question is for Brittany, but if you can humor me for a minute to go on a vision journey, Jacob, I'm going to steal Jacob's thing, or he's stealing my thing. Imagine a world, right? Back in 2020, when we talked about the pandemic, Jacob, imagine I'm sitting in this, like, it's like a little jail cell, but it's an office in Marblehead, Massachusetts. We lived in Salem, Massachusetts before I moved to Rochester and Barbara's Hood for a little bit during the pandemic. And I was just trying to keep the lights on at FEV Tutor. Just Brittany, like you said, what do we do? Like, what do we do with our hands? Like, we don't know what to do, right? This is wild. It's like 2% interest rates on homes. They never existed, but they did exist. It's like COVID. No one will ever know. No one will ever know what you all went through, right? Especially you two on the front lines, and what that meant for students. And, my sister Barbara was standing up at East High School with a computer. Some kids were at home with black screens. Some students were in the classroom. There's like 3 of them out of 17 or Algebra 1 class. But I was sitting there, and what I was doing as I was going through the very first cohort of outcomes-based contracting, when it was at Harvard Center for Educational Policy. And Rick, you mentioned Dr. Scott Murray, Dr. Lillian Nunez carried some of our OBC work through. And so OVC work has like a near and dear place in my heart. We executed with air tutors those first early days contracts. I'm sure were very imperfect, but hopefully it was good data, Brittany, for you and the team to learn from. But we proceeded to do that at Ector County for 3 years. We did it at Duval County with Paula Renfro, did it in Jackson, Mississippi. And so, there was a moment in time where my co-founder and I had to say, do we even want to be part of this conversation? What is an outcomes-based contract? Like, is it scary to put some of our money that we're going to earn on the line to drive student outcomes? And then you have to take a gut check. Well, the only thing that should matter to our company is student outcomes, right? It's the same thing that you said, the same thing that Barbara said. And the word student, to me, seems like it's at the core of everything, as it should be, and it can get lost in these conversations. And so the question I have for you, and that was 6 years ago, and now we're here in 2026 and moving forward, like, how do you feel that the EdTech community has embraced OBCs? Because I think it's expanded past tutoring, obviously, you know better than everybody. And then 2, like, if a firm or a partner isn't willing to participate in that, what type of sign is that to a school district leader like Dr. Mullen?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for your partnership and work. It's funny. So, quick origin story. I started as a district leader and was put on the initial team for the CEPR project. And that
Yes.
was after we'd gotten into remote learning. And then the superintendent said, "Can you train this thing at Harvard?" And I was like, "Huh? What are you talking about? I'm trying to get like computers in front of students." Anyway, regardless, really great experience. But Dr. Murray and Jasmine Walker, who were the leads at, of course, Ector and Duval, they now work at the center. So Jasmine's like my right hand woman, if you will.
Isn't
She
that
does all of
amazing
our
though? Like, the work
heartwarming.
you're doing on the front lines
Yeah.
of education
Uh-huh.
now translates into a world we can have a much larger impact.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
important
It's
to tell the stories and remember, like Jacob said, but that's
yeah.
amazing. Hey, Brittany, go
Yeah.
and get 90,000 students one-to-one devices, and then, join a cohort at Harvard for like 4-hour sessions. I love it. That's
Y'all probably couldn't get them because they were sitting in the Port of Houston for like 2 months, where we couldn't ever get any laptops. So I
Oh
was,
yeah, that was a thing too. I
obviously
remember.
like you were
I
holding them
love
all
the
confused.
spice that Rick brings. This is
oh, I
he gonna
mean,
bring the spice.
You never know what he's gonna say, but then when he says it, you're like, dude, you should be doing stand up somewhere, bro.
the,
This is good. Brittany,
yeah.
I
But yeah,
digress. I
no,
love it. You're awesome.
but Scott Murray does. He's one of our executive coaches, and so for our cohort work, we have an executive coach for each district that helps the senior leader in the system think through like what does this actually look like to block and buffer for your system to take on OBC. Because Ryan, as you know, and like anybody who's done an outcomes-based contract knows, like it's a different way of doing business. So you have to have a cross-functional team that includes finance and procurement and academics and data and technology all at the table together. And yes, we have moved. We continue to do work in high impact tutoring, especially at the state level, because that's where we started. And so we've learned the most about that. And so we currently have state partnerships right now in Arkansas, Texas, Florida, and California. And so all 4 of those states have really named that OBC is something that they're going to be continuing to invest in. And so we're doing anything from pilot work to full state scale. If you look at FTA in Florida, where they have all of their contracts for the grant funding that runs through the Lasting Year Center under an outcomes-based contracting model for their hand-held tutoring work. The other product lines that we've gone into are EdTech interventions. So that's something that doesn't have a human as the relationship-based tutor, but really it's either like an AI product that has some sort of like bot tutor, if you will, or it has just like, your typical EdTech interventions that of course have always been powered by some version of AI, but are using more and more generative AI to improve the programs and services for students. And then the third product line is professional learning. And so that's the first one that is not a direct to student intervention, but rather the theory of change goes through the classroom educator. Now that's a really critical one because it leads to the opportunity for a much broader impact when you think about the teacher's ability to really impact student outcomes. And it's more complicated, no longer theory of change, so we didn't go there first. To your question around what have we seen in the ed tech market in terms of bracing this, I'll go back to when we started our feasibility work. So you were in the feasibility work at Harvard. After that, we did another feasibility study for ed tech interventions. And so just like with the one for high impact tutoring, we interviewed providers, we interviewed district leaders, we interviewed all your big nonprofits in the ed tech space. So ISTE and Digital Promise and Ed Solutions, right? And we asked everybody, like, what would it take to move towards an agreement where we were really focused on the individual outcomes for every student? And it actually made sense in the marketplace for a district to be able to pay in that way and for a provider to be able to serve in that way. And so what we learned is that it's really important that you have an all-inclusive model for your pricing instead of an a la carte model, meaning that instead of purchasing the licenses, and then maybe if you happen to be able to screech together a couple extra dollars, you could maybe do a little bit of professional learning. Maybe you have somebody that's able to drop on the district like once during the year. Maybe if you happen to have ESSER funding, you can have a monthly coach that's coming into buildings, right? All of those are more of an a la carte model. And what we learned as we were talking to folks is that's actually a false choice to go to a district. Because if they purchase the licenses and not the implementation support that comes with the licenses, you're going to have a couple of super users in classrooms that figure it out, and the rest of the system will struggle to implement with integrity. And that's why you have the dosage problem that you do. Well, one of the reasons, right? There's a lot to that. But with that, when we moved to an all-inclusive model and then did a per pupil price, and I do say per pupil in ed tech, which I know is different than how you usually do it, it really forces the conversation to get much more clear up front about who you're trying to serve and how that is actually going to be put into action in the system so that you have that theory of change articulated in the contract. And there is no additional choices to be made about how many dollars are you going to spend to get a little bit better at implementation. Rather, the choices around how do you innovate with your partner to identify what it will take to actually get students to use the product in a meaningful way. When we talk about dosage, we're not just thinking about like a kid sitting in front of a YouTube video picking their nose, right? And I think that that's kind of the problem with this tech clash problem, what we're seeing right now, where like there's this real concern that is very real. That does happen in classrooms. We all know that, right? But what we're talking about under an OBC is to say, if you are actually going to get to dosage, it's not just sitting in front of the screen. It's actually that you're meaningfully engaging with texts and tasks that are within your zone of proximal development. And they're providing the data back to the educators to say, this is where these students are actually really struggling based on how they were participating in the use of this rigorous text and task. And you're able to use that to really drive instruction in the classroom. And it creates a much better understanding for the provider of how they can strengthen their product and drive toward better implementation by identifying like, what are the data reports that we actually need to create so that people can see dosage? Because guess what? The marketplace has never incentivized providers to do that, right? Y'all know if you've been in sales, you're not going to tell the district like what their dosage looks like, especially around renewal season, because then they're going to say, well, if only 5% of kids are using it, why am I purchasing this? And that's not like shade at any provider. That's a system problem, right? And so when we went and we were doing this work, we started talking with some ed tech providers and like very close allies that really, really care about the work. And they were very honest with us. And they said, this is really exciting. And our VCs are never going to go for this. There's just no way. Like it will break the bank. And so I went to the VCs and I said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Like, what does it look like in your mind? And all of the VCs that I spoke with in the education space had a very similar message, which was based on what you're sharing with me and the fact that dosage is actually a district requirement and districts have to figure out how to make sure that kids get the right dosage, this actually is a great agreement. And we see it as a long-term play for a much stickier way of contracting. Because guess what? When 95% of your kids in Duval are using the product with integrity, it's going to be real hard to pull that out of classrooms, right? That's a very different scenario than the 5% problem. And so when we think about that competitiveness, I actually had a panel at ASU GSV, and Malvika Backwad, who's on, she's a partner with Owl Ventures. She was on the panel, and I asked her, like, what would make this a competitive moat in the ed tech world, or do you see it becoming that? She said, for early stage companies, if you don't know what your impact is, you don't know what dosage means, and you don't have a stable revenue model, this is not for you. She would be very worried about a very early stage company doing this. And she said, if you are a more stable company and you're 2 to 3 years in your implementation and you do have an understanding of what your evidence base is and you're selling to districts in that way, if you're not doing an OBC, then I would be really concerned about you as an organization and be concerned about investing in you. And so I think that that kind of nuance was really helpful for me to understand as the ed tech work has been growing, because it is a very different marketplace. And so we really need to take that into consideration as we're thinking about, like, how do we really engage ed tech providers in this work and make sure that the right types of providers are entering these agreements, because it's not a like wholesale, everybody should do this tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so many words of wisdom to pull out of there, but I used to say in simple terms, like an outcomes-based contract is a forcing mechanism to set up a framework that gives us the best chance of success to drive outcomes for students. And by the way, like my mom's a 45-year public educator. Barb knows. My sister's a 13-year high school math teacher. My grandmother's a science teacher. And you said something like it's a system failure, like the 5% rule. Um, I would be like, why the hell do we have to do this? Shouldn't everyone just care about outcomes? But you're right. The reality is what the reality is. And so I'll pull that out, and then I'll serve the second part of my question back over to Barb and Rick, because Rick, it looks like he might have been a district administrator at one point based on his dry sarcasm and funny nature today. But what would happen, Barb or Rick, if, and Brittany knows the answer to the question, but if someone was like, no, Dr. Mullen and Dr. Fernandez, I don't really want to do an outcomes-based contract. What would that signal to you? Barbara, put yourself on mute, but I know you don't want to be on mute right now.
No, I don't. Only 6 years and I still talk with the mute button on. So I think a little divergently when it comes to this, right? Like I actually think that from the moment, I don't care if you're a teacher, if you are a retired principal, if you're a little bald-headed man named Bubba sitting on a rock somewhere, and you think of an ed tech solution, the next question you should ask yourself is, how do I know that this is solving a problem? So my recommendation to, early stage, all people is like, be very, very clear about what your impact is. Like, don't even come to my door unless you know what that is. And the reason I say that is because I think we use words like Princess Bride, right? That word doesn't mean what you think it means. Uh, and I say that because a lot of people do say outcomes. They say outcomes. They say student-based outcomes. They say learning outcomes. They say impact. They say all these things. And it could be something like how many kids showed up. And in my mind, I'm like, that's a really great metric, especially for out of school time, right? Like attendance is a huge metric. I worked with Mott Foundation quite a bit to like talk about these indicators of impact. And I was like, there's some kids that are just simply going to show up because they don't have anywhere else to go, or they're hungry, and you provide like some base layer of engagement for them. Engagement is another one, right? Like some kids are like usage, some kids are like dosage. What is engagement? And I'm like, there we define that very differently pedagogically than we do just like physically with body space and interest, right? So one, I think is very important when I work with a provider and a partner to hear how they are defining things. Are we aligned in the way we interpret words, first of all? Because I want to know if you think that like dosage and like 90% of my kids being on it is going to be is where the buck stops at your impact. And if you think that's where it stops, then I'll probably go, that's not rigorous enough. Like you didn't think about that deeply. You just want everybody to touch it, but you don't want to touch them. And so I really am thinking very deeply about that introspection and like how to push and probe providers in thinking about the work that we have to carry. Like I have to carry that water, and I need more than just kids are on it and kids showed up or kids, have like gone through the modules. And there is, it's adaptive in many ways. So you are looking at skill based, but when kids come out, is there transference, and how do you know that? So again, the same thing we do when we walk through classrooms is what are kids learning and how do you know is the same question that we use when we're talking to partners. What are kids doing? How do you know? What's the impact? What's the intervention? How do you know that something changed? And that's just like the eternal research question, because what you are providing is an intervention for a research question. It's a hypothesis that sprung in your brain one day and you decided to build a solution around it. And so it's not just enough to get funding for your research and to get a study site, which is a district partner. You have to go all the way. And I think that I owe it to my kids to push potential partners to go all the way. The other piece is that, right, we're very, I'm very keen on like, can you at least tell me what have you published around this? Now, if you're early, of course you haven't, but I'm like, partner with somebody to build it as you like embed the rigor in the building of your product or of your solution, so that you don't have to backtrack and wonder, right? You already know where some of the vulnerabilities of implementation are, some of the less than rigorous areas in terms of pedagogical alignment and instruction, or any type of other effectiveness are. And so I if someone hasn't done that rigor and they just like had a really great idea, knew some people, got some funding, went through, got a couple districts because they had cousins in there or something. I That's when my y'all know I've been around. I know how to say
You
right.
got a lot of
You
cousins,
right,
girl.
we laugh. It's
Maybe a
true.
board member, a
Like,
board
it's
member or
right,
two.
a board member. Like, y'all done had a good time. Ryan knows, like, you get one like happy hour out of me, and then we gonna have a real conversation, or you wasting my time.
Yep.
And that's it. Like,
Yeah.
cause the other thing that we're not naming here is one, getting into this game and getting into the ed tech space is about access and privilege. And there are people who their solution is trash upon trash, and they have gone through like 3 rounds of funding. And I'm like, this is terrible. Why are you putting this in front of children? Or teachers? Like, they deserve better. But they just have had access and they have had privilege and capital, right? And then the other piece is there are some folks who just cannot get up off the ground, like to save their lives. And I'm like, if everybody had this would be wonderful. And so that's the first thing to like name in terms of how I'm thinking about entry points into partner conversations and the level of rigor that you have put into the development of this work. But then the other piece is, and I think this is really important to name, is the journey of scale and change management. When you're talking about what makes something sticky in the district, what makes it sustainable, not necessarily what makes it an impact on student learning or student outcomes, but just like it's there, right? Is the change management strategy. And a lot of folks have not sat in this seat, and they get a lot of feedback and advising from users, but right, not the person who creates the conditions for it to be successful.
Boom.
And so that change management, and Ryan knows that's like my little happy place in the background, is like talking about these change management models in which you're doing this adoption cycle. Um, and that is so important because if I cannot manage the people through innovation, if I cannot support the people through this process, then it doesn't matter. And it could be anything from this awesome, amazing product to like on Tuesday we wear pink. Like, it's any type of change has to be thoughtfully managed, and it has to be clear like who's on first, who's going to do this, who loops around, who talks to the partner, who doesn't. And that just takes a lot. And it would be wonderful if if founders really understood that, because you're not CEOs. You're CEOs because you decided to be. And maybe you got a board like last week, right? With a check, then you got a board, and now you get the CEO life, but like you don't know how to run like an enterprise organization yet. And so that's an area of support. I think we can be mutually supportive, but I look for those things when I'm bringing folks on, because again, time is of the essence.
Yeah, for sure. And just to clarify one thing, Barbara, all of the payment outcomes, what the provider is actually being paid for, are student outcomes that are directly tied to what the district cares about that's in their strategic plan. And so
Yep.
they're typically like how the student is performing on the state assessment. Depending on the state you're in, there may be a social emotional learning outcome in there. And then there's typically a growth assessment like your NWA or iReady or whatever it is that you
Yep.
use as a state or as a district in order to monitor student growth. And so I just
Yeah.
wanted to name that because, like, me not saying that is a good reflection back for me that, like, I need to hold myself accountable to that as well.
No.
And so I just wanted to clarify that for, listeners that I completely agree with you. It has to be focused on the outcomes that students are actually achieving tied to their specific
Yeah.
learning goals. The dosage metric is what we call a process outcome. And so
Yeah,
that's
like
something that
proxy.
we track throughout the contract, and the district is responsible for that particular outcome and may have to pay out on the contingent payments if students don't achieve dosage. So it just creates that stickiness across the partnership. So
So
just wanted to
good.
clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't shout out Ryan a whole lot, but you did name my other places that I used to live, and I'll shout out Providence Public Schools because we did the performance-based contracts, like, 8 years ago. We were holding the folks. Now, what those performances look like in terms of, like, what we were naming, but I do name that model, I think it was under, Deb Gist as the commissioner at the time, it was something that I think was pretty forward-thinking. And I'm glad the rest of the world is coming along.
What's interesting is we use it all the time on the construction side, all the time, have been for forever, and design build or certain outcome measures, and um, it's never really translated for whatever reason. But I would think that it is just as likely that a district will struggle with the agreed upon outcomes as the provider, because I don't know about y'all, but I know every superintendent or district leader at one point has said, hey, that week I said for training, can you do that in maybe 30 minutes instead of that 1 week we allocated? And that happens all the time, and guilty as charged. But that kind of are to wrap up. I'd like to get both of y'all's perspectives on this last question. And Brittany, if you'd go first, what's the hesitancy of districts adopting this? Is it the metrics? Now all of a sudden there's going to be like true accountability attached to it? Is it the political pressure? Is it maybe the time frame to do this maybe a little bit longer than your traditional contract? And like, why isn't this just like common sense adoption? I'd like to get both of y'all's takes on that, but Brittany, if you go first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say that you're right. So the model that we built was from some of the other organizations that do this work for performance-based contracting in other industries. And so we work specifically with social finance and third sector capital partners. Third sector was our longer term partner, and they were actually a part of the feasibility work that we did out of Harvard. And the reason that we haven't, from my perspective, have not seen this stick as much in education specific to instructional interventions and opposed to operations is that measuring student learning is harder, right? So you can measure whether or not the timeline is met and the building is built, right? I'm not a construction person, so I'm sure that there's
No,
more
you're
to
right.
it than
That's it.
quality is, another factor there that perhaps is a little more challenging to measure when you're talking about operational elements. But for instruction, that's been one of the big barriers. And so we've been working on building out like what are those assessments that are very commonly used? And then the state-based partnerships, it becomes a lot easier to articulate that because, like, in Texas, everybody takes the STAR assessment, right? And so unless you're a really young learner, and we have to figure out how we're going to measure growth for early literacy, which, by the way, there's plenty of good assessments to do that, right? We can only use the STAR assessment as one of the major metrics. We recommend more than one assessment, though. So typically at least two assessments so that you're not just putting all your balls in one basket. The piece of it that I think now that the model is starting to mature, that will be hard. And what we're really focused on at the center is ensuring that we maintain that rigor and integrity of the original contracts, is that implementing things in schools is hard, right? Like we all know that. And so being able to do that at scale and being able to identify what it looks like for every school and every individual learner to have what they need, like that's the work of education, right? And so what we're working on is making sure that we're scaling out the evidence base around what those standards are, how you do that measurement, even democratizing the data to Barbara's point earlier around like, what are people choosing? Why are they choosing it? And how much are they paying for it? Right. So it spreads out a lot of that more technical work in a way that's easier to manage. But change management and actually implementing something with integrity in the classroom is something that we can't like automatize our way out of. And so that's where we really see the opportunity to not do it, but rather say like, where are we prioritizing this work? And how do we focus our efforts in this area to start small and learn so that in year 2, you can, triple the size of your engagement with Galileo or, quadruple the size of how many students you're able to serve in high impact tutoring contract. But like, it is important to recognize that this is not just about the contract. It's about actually following the contract after it's done. But because it's actually in board language and your community has seen it and your board has voted on it, any district leader can tell you, I told my board I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, right? I'm not going to go back to that board meeting and say, I didn't do my part, so I had to pay for outcomes that weren't achieved. And that's where it creates this real stickiness across the partnership for both parties to hold one another accountable to the outcomes that we know are possible with kids.
Yep. Dr. Mullen?
Yeah, I think to your point, districts and having like a challenge and saying maybe we do and maybe we don't. I would say just bluntly, and like Ryan knows this, I'm a little spicy, nugget too, is that people have low expectations for children. They just do. Like, this is hard. It's hard work. You signed up for it. And so if you don't believe that children can achieve at high levels, then you should find another job. And you should find another sector, to be quite honest, because I feel like this is not just a cash cow where accountability is like very, very low. And like, let's just make up some things to seem like we care or seem like maybe we're trying to move the needle. Like, move the needle. Because if you go to the larger districts like where Brittany's from, or even Providence, where there is high poverty, there's high mobility, there's high, like, children are still able to grow. Children are still achieving. Children are still performing. There is excellence in all pockets of some of the like most challenging districts, and it really isn't a children's problem. And so if children can still do that and persist in spite of all the things they bring to school, then the adults need to get it together. And so part of the work I love and why I'm a superintendent is because I'm an adult gatherer. Like, I love to bring the adults to the table and say, let's get this together because the kids are waiting for us. And half of the reason, I won't say half, this is not like scientifically proven, but I think my hunch is the reason why people are hesitant to attach student outcomes, student learning outcomes, these metrics that are aligned to these tests, what have you, is because they don't believe that children can do this. And they don't want to be held accountable to the point where now it rubs up against their identity of being an educator. My job is to grow kids. Oh my goodness, this data point says my kids are not growing. Well, let's come back to the table. And so what partners can do is bring this continuous improvement mindset of, okay, what does it look like to iterate and continuously get to, right? You have the benchmarks, you have the ultimate outcomes. And, we're saying to our boards, I'm going to keep these metrics in front of you all the time so that you can see that our work is moving towards it. But there are pockets of children who are rapidly selling 10x, as they say, whatever. And then there are kids who are just persisting. And so we need to look at what are those conditions. I personally love this method of bringing partners along, not so you can see a return on investment, not necessarily so you can say, should we keep it or chuck it? But because I think this is a skill set and the like very real way that we need to be approaching this very human-centered work. Children can learn at high levels. We know that this work is hard. Let's do it. And like, let's hold ourselves accountable to it. And that's what the performance-based or outcomes-based contracts creates the conversation for. And I think if we're being honest, again, depending on who is at the table and the students you're serving, some folks are afraid that they're not going to meet the mark. But I just don't believe that that's the case.
Amen. Amen. Same.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna bring me on here, I'm gonna preach a little bit, Like,
Barbara,
that's what I think.
While we're here,
Like, that's the
Why we're here.
mentality that every biter needs to bring to the conversation because, like, it is our responsibility. If you are working in the education system, it is our responsibility to do this work. And like we say all the time, like, you're the buyer. You have the opportunity to really shift the narrative and make sure that the focus is actually on student outcomes. And like, we just want to empower folks to be able to do
Yeah.
that. And so
If
I
we
love
just demanded it, it would happen. Right? I mean, that's really how
Barbara,
simple it will
Mindset.
be.
It's the mindset.
Barbara, kind of one thing that you said that I like to take a page from Dr. Connor again is like asterisk for learning is I love kind of that idea of you're a collector of people because I find a lot of times people at conferences ask me like, what do you do? And I'm like, I just have good people in network, right? I'm like Thanos, right? I'm collecting the people on the
I
Infinity
mean, the purple
Stones.
stone.
Yeah, that's it. So, but
For a good cause. For a good cause, Jada. Right?
but I'll tell you, and we'll wrap after this. But I'll tell you, that's actually how this podcast started, right? Like me, Ryan, Rick, Matt, and Jeff were just jamming on a text, and we were like, the stuff we're talking about, we should probably put out in the world because we're talking about districts, we're talking about priorities, we're talking about vibe coding, we're talking about superintendents that are doing crazy work. Like we have all of this knowledge collectively. Like, why don't we put it out there? And look, if 5 people listen to this, awesome. Those 5 people get value out of it. If 5,000 listen, cool. That's 5,000 people who get value, but ultimately we only need one person to listen and implement this in their district, and then those students that they serve are uh, those who benefit from this. So we are super appreciative, Brittany and Barbara, for you joining. One call out for both of you guys. Barbara, I know you're like the Substack queen now and you're putting out content. Like, where's a good place for folks that want to follow along your journeys? Where's a place for them to follow you?
Yeah, I would just say LinkedIn is the hub for all of my professional ideas. I do have a link to the newsletter for a forthcoming book, Healing Centered Leadership in Schools. And, there's all kinds of crazy stuff in that Substack, but I promise it's all about kids and learning and leaders. So it's relevant.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And Brittany?
For the Center for OBC, you can follow us on LinkedIn. We also have a website. If you just Google Center for OBC, you'll find it real easily. And again, all of our resources are open source, able to download and use in your own context. And we're happy to connect with anybody that has more questions.
Amazing. Thank you both for joining the Boys of EdTech with our inaugural Doctors of EdTech, Gals of EdTech, Ladies of EdTech. So please come back and educate our listeners, open invite whenever you have something. Barbara, when you launch your book, I expect you to launch it here. We will make sure we pre-order some copies. So just throwing that out there. But super appreciative of you guys spending time. And that's our episode. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Thank y'all.